And I'm Jocelyn.
And we are your hosts for Why Can't We Talk About It? And I just want to welcome everyone to another episode. How are you doing today, Jocelyn?
I am good. I'm having a pretty good day. It is probably what most would consider a cold weather season. And when I used to live in Toronto, I would probably be chilly right about now. But I'm very much enjoying my life here in North Carolina because the weather is warm. I'm getting out for lots of walks still. So I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good too, although I can't say the same weather-wise compared to you. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I actually put a lot of my summer stuff away recently.
Mm-hmm.
But some days it's almost like I kind of want to bring it back out. It's a bit warm, and then like one day it'll be super gloomy and it's raining, and then I go in the office and it's too warm, and it's unfortunately a bit uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad to be working from home some days because everything is under my control and it feels nice.
Working from home is the best.
It is the best. And I don't know how we used to do it every single day, going to the office, at least for what we do.
It was truly the dark ages. I look back at it as the dark ages.
Yeah, I'm curious what historians will write about this time period sometime in the future. So, do you have any recos for us this week?
I do. I have something totally different. It's not a book. It's not a show or anything like that. It is a food item.
Okay.
I guess this is the second food item now because I previously recommended Rooibos tea, which is delicious, and I wish I had a cup with me right now. But what I am recommending this week is Hu chocolate. H-U chocolate. Have you heard of this?
I have not.
My girlfriend here, she's so sweet. She gave me a bar just because, which it's always so nice to get little presents like that, just because. And this is her favorite chocolate, or rather it comes from one of her favorite food places in New York City. So I hope this is not just an American thing. I'm very sorry to our Canadian listeners if it is. Oops. You can order it online though. But apparently you can get it in Whole Foods. It's so good. It's just, it uses very minimal ingredients. And I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh, I mean, I'm not going to say no to any chocolate, but I was like, oh, this is going to be like one of those healthy chocolates. You know, the ones that are like cacao and not chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
No, this was chocolate. It was rich and delicious. And I almost ate the entire bar in one setting. It was so good. I immediately logged on to be like, where can I get this? I can't be without it now. Now that I've had it, I can't not have it. So Hu chocolate. Hu chocolate.
I hope it's online somewhere because I know you just said hopefully it's not just for our American listeners, and apologies to Canadian listeners. I do have to say though, technically apologies to other people across the world because we have listeners outside of US and Canada.
That's true. That's true. Okay, sorry y'all.
Yeah, we have, this is something just from me. I know Danny's the one who likes to look at some of the stats. But we have listeners in Asia. We do have listeners in Europe. And I mentioned this to Jocelyn recently. There was one listener in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
That surprised me, but hey, why not? So yeah, we're going to have to make note of that, I think, going forward. We actually have listeners technically globally now.
Okay, I'll try to keep my recommendations accessible, but if you can get your hands on some Hu, then I do recommend. What about you, Danny?
So for me, for this week, my recommendation is based off of what I did today. I purchased tickets to Hamilton.
Ooh.
Which I know Jocelyn is a huge fan of. You've actually seen it, right?
I haven't seen it. So I was impacted by COVID. I got tickets. I felt so lucky that I logged on time when Mirvish Theater, which is in Toronto, released them. I bought these super expensive tickets. I was like, it's worth it. This is it. My mom loves shows. This is going to be amazing. And the world shut down. So I haven't been to see it, but I have seen the live theater performance on Disney Plus.
Okay. Because I remember when we were still working on the same team, you were listening to that soundtrack nonstop.
Oh, so good.
And I remember thinking, what on earth is Hamilton? So it wasn't until I did see the show Disney Plus as well. And I think I was in the same boat as you because I did purchase tickets back in, I think, like early 2020. And of course, I think it was like a month before my show date, everything shut down. So I missed out. However, because of that, I think I was able to get access to make purchases today. But it's for like April of 2023. So it's going to be a while. But the point is, I got it. Hopefully, it is, nothing happens by then. So hopefully I can see it. However, just for the people who have no idea what that is, it is a Broadway show. So I think the description that I read online to kind of describe what it is that Hamilton is a sung and rapped through musical by composer and actor Lin-Manuel Miranda. The musical itself tells the story of American founding father Alexander Hamilton, and the show draws heavily from hip-hop as well as R&B, pop, soul, and traditional style show tunes. And lastly, one really unique thing that I like about it is that it casts non-white actors as the founding fathers of the United States and other historical figures. So,
yeah,
that's pretty
so cool. It's such a good show.
Yes.
You're going to have such a great time.
I sure hope so. And maybe, I wonder if they're going to come down. Are there shows in your area?
Yes, Hamilton's playing at the local theater here. Our DPAC is what it's called. I think that stands for Durham Performing Arts Center. I sure hope it is. I don't know if I'm going to get tickets. I might. I don't know. There's another show that I am going to likely buy tickets for that I've already seen that I'm obsessed with called The Six. It's another musical that I'm not even a musical person. I actually hate musicals. I'm very much like, stop singing it, just say it. But I do make an exception for Hamilton, and I do make a super big exception for The Six, which is, again, another historical reference. It's the musical is a pop show done by the 6 wives of Henry VIII. It's telling their side of the story, but in the form of a pop competition.
Oh, really? Okay.
It is epic. Yeah. It is so epic. And I've actually already seen it in Washington, and it's coming here. I'm going to see that. So, I mean, I could see Hamilton too, but
not the same.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Let me know how it is. If you're like, yeah, this is like, even though you saw it on Disney Plus, you got to see it in person. The tickets are still hella expensive. And I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, the price range is the same. It's the same.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It's the same.
Same price range as before. So
here it's not quite as much as it was in Toronto, but it's still like a sticker shock. So I'm like, if I don't know if I can spring for it, but let me know. Let me know if you're like, no, this is amazing and you must go.
Okay. I will let you know in about half a year away.
Okay.
Okay. So kind of just going into what we want to talk about today for today's episode, the topic is boundaries. And for our listeners, I imagine for a lot of people, probably it's a word that you recognize. And then for some people, maybe the people who are like me, who may not be as familiar, I think today would be a good time for us to kind of discuss that. One thing that I want to just kind of bring up, though, and let Jocelyn know too, is in terms of this topic, and I was getting ready for our episode, and I was thinking about how this topic of boundaries affects me, what it means. I actually had a pretty challenging time when I compare it to other episodes we've done in the past. And by that, I mean, when I think about previous topics, I immediately can think of either personal experiences or some kind of event where I go, yes, I can use this as an example to explain the subject we're on for that day. However, when it comes to boundaries, it's actually something where I couldn't really think of a lot that really comes to mind right away. And I'm not saying that in a way I'm trying to say like, oh, I never dealt with boundaries or things like that. I'm sure I have. It's just I don't think I had the wording to describe those at the time. Because for me, it wasn't actually until I started therapy that even the term boundaries came up from my therapist. And even then, I don't think it's something that I talk about often. So I'm very curious to talk about it because I have a feeling I'm going to be learning a lot today. And I think it's going to be from the point of view of someone who may not necessarily recognize what boundaries is. And so maybe I can learn and kind of learn along with our listeners at home.
Well, I don't know that I'm an expert that can teach people necessarily, but yes, Danny, I am of the mind that if we all knew how to set boundaries and were comfortable with what boundaries are, so many of the world's problems could be solved. So I think we're definitely going to have some unique perspectives here today.
So I don't know if, Jocelyn, you had anything specific you wanted to start us off with for today?
Sure. Okay. So because you're not familiar with boundaries, I'm going to describe what I feel like boundaries are and what it feels like when somebody crosses a boundary.
Ooh, okay.
So for me, a boundary is a limit that I set that if somebody crosses over that limit and they're encroaching on my personal values or my safe space, they have crossed a boundary. Everybody has different limits. Everybody has different parameters for what their boundaries might be. But for example, I'll just give a very basic one, and I can use work as an example, but boundaries are in every part of our life. I can say, at work, I like to work hard. I like challenging work. But when a team culture says, oh, we're like family here, that is going across my boundary. Because for me, my beliefs and values and outlook on work is that work is work, and my family, the people I love and hold dear, are my family. And those are two separate things. And if work is expecting me to treat my colleagues the way I would treat my family members and hold them in the same esteem and regard, they are crossing my boundary there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think that's something where it's within your own values, but it's internal. It's not like anyone, I guess, necessarily would know that's your boundary.
Totally. And that is a very important part of this. And this is why I say I feel like so many of the world's problems would be solved if we recognize that. So my boundaries are my responsibility to set and make you aware of. They're not your responsibility to try and guess at. So I think a lot of what I want to talk about today is how it can be so hard to set those boundaries. I think this is a problem that affects a lot of women, but it affects people in general. And for me, I recognize that I had a hard time setting boundaries, specifically in situations with authority figures, because that is what was modeled to me when I was a child. So, and this is very common for most people, but for me, I really internalized the fact that my mom specifically would tell me that you have to respect your elders. That is the most important thing. Like if they tell you to do something, you do it. And full disclaimer here, my mom is 1,000% amazing. She is the best human on this planet. She's my bestie. I talk to her every day. And she was just doing the best with what she had, right? Like
right.
Parents are all making it up as they go along. So love you. This is not mom slander. Okay. I'm just setting this out there. Yeah. So my mom would tell me to respect authority and not to talk back ever. In other places, it also came up. Like she really modeled that it was important to put other people's needs in front of your own.
Oh.
So she would tell me with the whole authority thing, she would tell me, don't talk back, listen. Yeah. But she would show me with how she acts in her own life that other people's needs are more important than her own. I would constantly see her drop everything to accommodate the people in her life, her parents, my dad, us. Like, she always put other people first. And sometimes she'd be resentful of that. Like, I know that she could come across a little bit as passive aggressive or just unhappy, and I wouldn't realize what it was until she explained the situation, and I realized that her boundaries had been crossed. But she didn't have the language to vocalize that and articulate that that was what was happening to her. So for a very long time, I didn't either.
Oh, okay.
I can give you a few examples in my life where my boundaries were crossed, how that felt, and how I recognized it and tried to fix the situation. That might help you if you have some examples. Does that work?
That will work. I think if you give examples, I wonder if then I can go, oh, okay, I have something similar, or I experienced something similar, to be able to like, oh, okay, that's considered a boundary issue.
Okay. Let's go back to work. I'm going to give you a specific example, and this I realized through therapy goes back to the like respecting your authority figures. This is where it got me in a bit of hot water. So I had a manager who crossed all sorts of boundaries, professional and personal. I mean, this person had me working so hard. It was not long after I started the job where I was taking on a lot of their responsibilities. And it was really hard for me to push back and say no and draw a line and say, it's not my responsibility to do my job and your job, or even doing my job and your job is very stressful for me. I didn't feel empowered to say that to her because I didn't know how to set that boundary. They also crossed personal boundaries. I don't know if I'm going to get into specifics, but you can trust me here when I say that this manager got involved in my personal life in a way that was very intrusive and not appropriate. And I felt completely helpless. I think part of it, I am putting a lot of this on me and saying like, I didn't set the boundary and so this person crossed it and I let it happen. I know that that's not the entire story. Part of it is also like in that type of power dynamic, it was completely on that person to not abuse that relationship and put me in a position where they'd say, I'm writing your performance review, so you better do this. Like that's, yeah, like that would have been very challenging to set a boundary in that situation. But my point is, when I look back on that situation and I understand what was happening, and every time a conversation would happen that was too personal, every time I was being asked to do something that was too much to take on at work, I would just go through with it and I would feel so resentful. I would be so upset. I would feel like almost violated. That's a very strong word, but in the personal situations, it just felt so invasive. I wanted to be left alone. Like it was a very physical feeling. It was pretty intense. I know like not all boundary crossing is like this, and some boundary crossing is worse than this, but this is my personal experience. And what I wish I had done and what I have learned to do going forwards is set those boundaries early on. So I wish what I had done in that situation when that person asked me to take on more managerial responsibilities, I wish I had said something to the effect of, I'm at capacity with my workload right now. I'm interested in taking on those responsibilities, but in order to do that, something else from my plate will need to be taken off, and I'd like it to be recognized that this is above the scope of my job. Because it's my personal value that I'm not going to do work that I'm not paid for, and I'm not going to make work my identity. I also wish when things got too personal that instead of trying to be empathetic, I had set a boundary and said, I am really honored that you feel comfortable enough with me to share something like that. But for me, I believe that work should stay separate, and I can recommend XYZ channels like therapist, other resources for you to talk to if that's something that you need.
Is it fair for me to say, just listening to that, I almost want to say it just kind of sounds like you have a definition of your role in certain situations, in this case, a work scenario. So it's like you have a definition of like, I work here, this is my role, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I have someone in an authority figure in a managerial role. I have an idea of a definition of what they're supposed to be doing. But once they start doing, in this case, more than that, where they try to blur the line between employee, employer, or manager role, non-manager role, that's when you're like, I guess what I'm saying is by default, I want to go, oh, as I'm describing, it's like, oh, this person is blurring the lines. But I guess that's another way of saying crossing a boundary.
It is. And going back to your point of saying like, not everybody is going to know what your boundaries are. In fact, nobody knows what your boundaries are unless you share them. There's definitely, like I mentioned, there's an element of like, they should have recognized their authority position and not done inappropriate things. But at the same time, what I'm trying to do here is say that person maybe in past teams had it work out for them that they were friends with all of their coworkers. There are some teams out there that are like that, I have to say this was a very weird situation. And if that person was conducting themselves this way on other teams, there may be a reason why they're not on those teams anymore. But I'm just saying, maybe that person didn't know that what they were doing was not okay. And in that case, what I'm trying to take ownership of is they couldn't tell necessarily that I was in so much pain from them crossing over into my boundaries. And I take responsibility for, not having set them and holding them properly. I should have made that person aware, this is my boundary. And then if they crossed it, then I could make it very clear and say, hey, we had a conversation where I said I didn't want you to do this, and you kept doing it, and I am actively trying to teach you that you can't treat me that way.
Right. Going back to how you explain how, like, oh, now looking back, there's a way in how you would conduct that if that scenario, I guess, repeat itself as an example. I imagine for that scenario, I'm sure a lot of people probably have dealt with it, or who knows, sometime in the future they may come across the same thing or something similar. What do you think was, I know you explained a bit about where you got it from, maybe with how you saw how your mom did things or how you learned things. But my question coming up is, why would most people have a hard time with establishing boundaries if they come across them and they're like, this is about to be an issue, but then they kind of go, well, I'm just going to go with it?
I can very easily answer this for you.
Ooh, okay.
It's because we don't want to appear selfish, and maybe we have a hard time with conflict, and we have people-pleasing tendencies. So remember when I said that my mom puts everybody else's needs before hers?
Yeah.
I saw that modeled, like you should be selfless, like putting other people's needs before your own. That is what is important to do. So in that situation with my manager at the time, I thought that this person clearly needs X from me. And if I don't provide X, then I am being selfish and I'm not being empathetic, and it is more important for me to make that person comfortable and happy because they need X than it is for me to keep myself comfortable and value my own needs first.
Right. Oh, okay. Great explanation. And I think that's actually very important for people to hear too, because sometimes I imagine if I was in the same scenario and I ended up doing the same thing, I may not be aware of why it's happening. Somehow it may feel like, let me know if this is how it was too. It's like, you can tell that it feels wrong, but it feels like the right thing to do. I guess if you don't do it, like you said, it's it might become a problem. So it's like you feel like it's the correct thing to do in that moment, but somehow it's like deep down you're like, but this feels wrong. Is that what it's kind of like?
Yeah, that's a great way of describing it, Danny.
Okay. So I'm kind of wondering now if maybe part of me talking about boundaries being something that I'm not familiar with could also be just terminology or language.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's probably the case. I think a lot of us have just getting through life, you're learning, okay, well, these are my values and these are my boundaries. If you've ever felt like you've been in a situation where somebody is imposing themselves on you in a certain way, whether they're like making a joke and you're not comfortable with it, but you're not sure how to speak up and this conversation is going on and it's affecting you, that's one of your boundaries being crossed.
Ah, okay. I'm going to rethink some of the stuff then because I think that it probably is something that I'm thinking about how if for me, terminology can be an issue, I imagine for other people that it could be a thing too. The thing that keeps coming back to me right now is just the idea like, oh, I'm trying to think of examples, but the term of someone going so-and-so crossed the line. I think I've heard that a lot in the past. I guess I don't hear a lot of people go, oh, so-and-so crossed the boundaries or things like that. Like it's just like, but crossing the line, that I definitely heard multiple times. So I think that could be maybe where the challenge is for me. It's just the language that was used, that what I'm familiar with compared to, I guess maybe what's more modern is to say like, oh, these are your boundaries and someone's crossing their boundaries.
Yeah, that very well might be the case.
Okay. So I guess work is something where, I mean, that's a pretty prime example, I think, to say that. But you were saying that it could cross, I guess, in almost any scenario?
Yeah, for sure. I can give you another example. We kind of talked about this in our friendship breakup episode, but I was friends with a person who made me really uncomfortable because of the things that they said. They were always having conversations with me where they wanted to speak negatively about people in their life. So it would basically become these like shit talking sessions. And it wasn't mutual friends or anything. I would have handled that a lot differently. It was specifically people in that person's life that they would speak very badly about. And instead of saying, well, maybe you can see it from their perspective, or setting my boundary and saying, I'm really not comfortable speaking so negatively about people that I've never met. And if you feel this way, I think the healthiest thing to do might be for you to have a conversation with them. Or if you need to vent, there might be somebody else that you can vent to, but that's just not something I can do with you. I wish I had set that boundary instead of letting the friendship disintegrate. But instead, I felt like that person needed to vent to me. That person was going through a hard time. They were sad and they needed somebody to talk to about it. So I let myself be that dumping ground and participate and say, oh yeah, I can't believe they did that to you. Or, oh yeah, instead of saying what I really believed. I was really going against my own beliefs too, like participating in this. So I was letting my boundaries be crossed in that scenario.
And that conversation we had for the topic on friendship and even just the one earlier about the work, these were, I guess I could say, years ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say you are now with boundaries? Has there been a change over time? And also, I guess I want to ask secondly is, if there has been, I guess, changes positively and whatnot, how did you get there?
Okay. So definitely I've made progress. I think in the work department, that's been really easy because since that unfortunate scenario, I've worked on teams that maintain a fairly good air of professionalism. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that I've had to worry about that much. But in terms of capacity and the volume of work, that's definitely going to come up over and over again. And I feel very confident in my ability to handle the situation now. And the way that I did it is I just explained to my manager the way that I wish I had back then. Listen, if you're going to want me to take this on, then you have to understand that this and this are going to drop because I personally cannot work 10 plus hours a day. I value my home life more than I value this. I really said it like very similarly to that and like put it in perspective.
Yeah.
And they understood like right away. It wasn't even like there's no pushback. They didn't realize, right? And I think that's often the case, right? People are not always encroaching on your boundaries because they have malicious intent. A lot of the time, they just don't know. It doesn't have to be a necessarily hard conversation. I think for a lot of us that are not into conflict, it can be scary, the thought of saying like, okay, I have to advocate for myself, but it does take practice, but it's not always going to be as hard as you might be building it up to be.
Oh, I see what you mean. I know I talked about it earlier where I said, oh, it didn't really come up until I had to like start with therapy. And I think at one point my therapist brought up that term. That obviously, I think you had said in the past that that's something where therapy helped you in this department as well?
Yeah. So I did go to therapy for that particular work situation. And that's also where I learned a lot about the importance of boundaries. I think I knew what boundaries were, but I wasn't applying any of the techniques of how to set boundaries, why it's important to keep your boundaries. I wasn't applying any of that in life, like especially at work. So my therapist at the time gave me those tools and explained to me the importance. And it resonated with me so much because I could see how I was letting people cross boundaries in various parts in my life. And to your point, you just asked, like, how do you stop that from happening?
Yeah.
What do you do? There are certain parts of my life where it still happens, but for the most part, what I tell myself is as much as I want to help other people and want to value the needs of others, it is just as important to value what I need too. Like I need to look at myself, my values, what I need as the most important.
Right. Yeah, I'm just thinking about how when you describe why boundaries get crossed and the fact that you explain like, oh, it's a factor of, well, you have to let people know, but also it sounds like whether it's your life, I'm sure in my life, we come across people who maybe don't understand it from their end. Maybe they're habitual boundary crossers, maybe someone like that. But I guess one thing I want to say is it may actually just be very difficult to advocate for ourselves sometimes, even though we are, I guess, I want to say like for ourselves, like we should be the most important. Like we are our own person, and for the purposes of like mental health and things like that, it's important that we stay true to our values. I think this is where it comes into play. It's like if you have certain values, you have to do your best to live your values. And I think when you don't, that's when boundaries get crossed. That's when resentment, I think, will start to appear, and a host of really crappy things will start to happen. And I think that's what I'm kind of getting even from almost like a general overview of what's underneath boundaries and having boundaries and what happens when they are crossed and what happens underneath what we feel and what we think and what it can lead to. I can imagine someone who, if there's somebody who doesn't always take their own health into their own hands and have agency for themselves and are instead putting that on the back end and always trying to cater to other people, whether that's resentment, I imagine that leads to stress, and then that leads to other ailments is what I imagine would happen down the line. But when it's just so normalized for certain people, you don't think twice about that as being an issue. So I think as we're talking today, I actually can kind of sense for myself that, oh, boundaries are actually more important than I thought it was.
Another way to look at something you just mentioned, somebody who lets their boundaries be crossed and they become resentful. Yes, it is definitely bad for your health, I'm sure. But an alternate perspective is if you're the type of person that says yes, but then is resentful of that person, that's not a very nice way to be. I think we've all been there, right? Like we are definitely all guilty of this where we've said yes and then we might say something like, oh man, can you believe that she asked me to do that?
Yeah.
That's not nice. That's not me being a very good friend to that other person. And I wouldn't want them to think that of me, right? Like, what I wish I had done instead of saying yes in that situation is said, that's something I can help you with. I just have a lot on my plate right now. Can we revisit it in like 2 weeks? And I'd be happy to do it with you. Something like that. That's on me for not showing what my boundary was. That person probably didn't know. So I'm saying we have all been there. If you haven't, you're lying. Okay. But if you are a people-pleasing, putting others first, and feeling resentful, that's actually you not being the best version of yourself.
Right.
So that's another way that I look at it too.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not like I want to say if I was in a situation like that, and if I didn't really know what to say, I think that's something that I think I've come across too for myself, where it's like someone asks you something and you just don't have a good way of being like, well, I don't really want to, but like a nicer way of saying it, then I think I could lead it into something where I go, oh yeah, sure, I guess I can do that. And then you're like, I don't really want to though. And then I think that's when the resentment builds. But like you just said right now, it's like there's clearly other ways to do so. I think it's for people who may have that issue. It's like there are ways to, and fortunately or unfortunately, it does take practice, and it might take some time to learn it and to practice it and get better at it. But it sounds like there's definitely a solution for it.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we're having trouble with that language, like voicing it, there is a book that came out not too long ago. The author is Melissa Urban, and she wrote a book called The Boundaries Book, I believe. It's The Book of Boundaries. Set the limits that will set you free. Oh, that resonates. We'll put it in the show notes. But what I like from her book is she uses green, yellow, and red language.
Okay.
This is maybe how we can practice this kind of thing. So the green language is the softest. It's like, you have to assume that the person that you're interacting with didn't mean to cross your boundary. So you're not going to be like, oh, you suck. I never want to see you again.
Yeah.
Like we're not jumping straight to that. You use language like, hey, want to let you know that doesn't really make me comfortable. If you want to talk like that or talk to me like that, I'm going to have to cut our conversations short, and you can talk to somebody else about that particular thing. The orange language is if you've already used the green language and said, hey, please don't talk to me like that, but they continue to, then you get a little bit more harsh and you can say, I have asked you not to do that, and you have shown me that you don't care, that you're making me uncomfortable. If you continue to do that, I don't think we can be friends anymore. And then the red language is where you're like, you suck, bro. We can never see each other again. Probably not like that, but like you get what I mean. Yeah. It's a spectrum, right? And so it can feel like anytime you have to advocate for yourself, it can feel like you're about to go into the red zone, but that's not the case. I think we need to practice that kinder, easier green language.
Yeah, I think so. Because as I'm listening to you give the 3 examples of the 3 colors, when you give, I think, the language to say it, there's something about it where I go, ooh, that seems harsh, or that feels a bit harsh. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I would want to say it like that. Even though I think that's what actually is the proper, maybe even healthy language that can get the point across to set that boundary. But I think as we're kind of chatting, I think I'm hitting on something for myself where I go, the default feeling is, ooh, that's not nice. And I wonder if that's also a common thing of why boundary setting is so tough, because there is something inherent there that goes, that's not a very nice thing to say to somebody. And the easier thing would be to go, just say yes. But the tough thing is to advocate for yourself and explain and put that out there. And I guess be assertive in what you have to say. But I do think that's, again, the solution. But it's hard is what it is.
Put yourself on the receiving end of it. That might make it feel a little bit different. I think if somebody came to you and said, Danny, you've been talking to me about X lately, and I just want to let you know that I'm not okay with that. you wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, that person's so mean. You, being the wonderful human that you are, I think you'd be like, oh wow, I really didn't know. I'm going to do some reflecting on this. Like, you wouldn't immediately be like, man, I hate that person. They're so mean. Like, no, I don't think you'd do that, right?
No, I wouldn't. That is true. I'm pretty sure a part of me will probably be like, oh, I feel bad now because I didn't realize I was doing that. But I guess that's me.
Yeah, but then you have that conversation and apologize, and that person can say, thanks for recognizing my boundary and for apologizing, and let's move forward and have an even stronger relationship. Because if that person was just like, oh, great, and I have to talk to Danny again, and they were like not showing you their true feelings, that would suck.
Actually, yeah, you're right. Because I think I would actually dislike it even more if I found out that this person was just letting me go on and on and on. But deep down, they're like, ugh, can he just stop?
Hundo P.
I think I'd rather know. And yeah, preferably in a not too harsh of a way. But yes, I would like to know that if I am overstepping myself onto somebody else's boundaries, then yeah, I think I would like to know. And hopefully a civil discussion can help with that. And I think it'll go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to this conversation for today? Or?
I think that's it. Have you kind of recognized some boundaries in your own life after we've talked about this?
So at the moment, I still can't actually think of anything very specific. I think what I'll actually do today, though, is after this, I think I'm going to have a think and reflect regarding the language that I used in the past, which was, like I said, crossing the line.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not I can think of anything specific to me where either someone did that I recognized, or maybe even something I did. Who knows? I'm sure it's a learning process, so I'm pretty sure there's things that I've done that I can learn from. So if I can think of them, I have no problem bringing it up in a future episode. And if anything, I think we can learn from that together. And I think that would be nice.
Cool. Okay.
All right. So I just want to thank the listeners again for tuning in to our episode today of Why Can't We Talk About It?
Before we go, we wanted to talk about a reader question, or a listener question, I should say. And this is a good chance for me to say that if you have any questions that you want to submit, you can DM us on Instagram. Our handle is at Why Can't We Podcast, or you can send us an email at whycan'twepodcast@gmail.com. So the question that we wanted to talk about today comes from a listener who wanted to ask about anxiety. And specifically, their question was, what do we think about the fact that anxiety seems to be such an increasing topic in today's society? It seems like so many people, especially young people, have anxiety. And sometimes it can also seem like they might be using the term lightly to the point where they might not have anxiety, or they might be saying that this certain thing is causing them anxiety when maybe that they're just feeling nervous. What do we think about the fact that anxiety is such a prevalent topic in today's society? That's basically the question.
So I'm going to take a go at it. I think my first thought when I think about that question is that it's probably more prevalent because I think the language is finally being more well known. Like, people know anxiety is a thing. And at the same time, I think because of the fact that it's becoming more normalized, anxiety is okay for people to say. And I think that's great. Although I can kind of understand that, maybe like for people like Jocelyn and I, people who are listening, people who are interested in this space, they'll be like, yeah, it sounds right. But I've definitely heard of people who go, what is that? Or people who may not really recognize what it is. So they may not be as comfortable, I guess, with people talking about anxiety and things like that. And so I think if they are like that, they may be more prone to push it off or brush it off, I suppose. But I think it will take time. But I am kind of glad to hear that that is language that more people are using. However, in terms of whether or not that's something where the wording may get used too much, That's a tough one, I think, because in a previous episode, I remember specifically saying that I'm somebody who might use the word nervous and anxiety almost like interchangeably. Yes, I understand it's not the same thing, but I think for the purposes of trying to explain a feeling or an emotion, I think it works for me. So I guess I'm guilty of that, trying to use both words. But at least it's kind of like, it's important that it's being used, and that's why we're talking about it. However, yeah, I'm not too sure about whether or not it's really an issue if somebody's using it too much, if they just are using it for other reasons. And that just may be something where someone needs to learn and understand exactly what each word is used for. And so I don't fault people for doing that.
I think the person might be getting at the fact that some people might be using anxiety as, if they don't actually have anxiety, because it's become so common, they might be using anxiety as an excuse to maybe get out of doing certain things or not dealing with certain issues. I think that was kind of like the leaning. That's what I got from the question. And I agree with you, Danny. I think that it's become more prevalent because now we have the language for it. And I think it's become more prevalent because there is a rise in this next generation having anxiety. So many studies have shown that, like, social media has such an effect. It's not fake news, you know, like anxiety, it definitely is increasing. But in terms of people using it lightly, like you, Danny, I'm of the mind where if they want to use that language because they don't know any better and it helps them express themselves, that's okay. But one thing to remember with anxiety is that you don't have to let it consume you. So if you are the type of person that's using it as a crutch, so to speak, like to get out of things in your life, I would encourage you to look at how you can help yourself, because there are definitely methods that you can take on. Therapy is one. There are so many to help you deal with anxiety. So if you're using anxiety to hide from certain things, whether you have it or not, I encourage you to look at the root cause of that and ask yourself why you feel the need to use it. Maybe you really do have it. Maybe you are just trying to avoid something. It's worth reflecting on that and understanding that you're not alone and help is out there.
Great point. I like that last part. So thank you for that. And thank you for the person who sent in that question. If anyone else, whether it's for this episode, any past episodes, or any future episodes, if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to send it our way, and then we will bring it up on the podcast.
Please be nice.
Yes, please be nice. Well, we'll filter out what's not nice.
All right, let's wrap it up.
Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We will talk to you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.